right now. So I'd like to call this Finance Committee meeting for January 11th, Tuesday, January 11th to order. And I'll do roll call. Alder Corpus Dax.
Present.
Alder Galvin. We can't hear you, Alder Galvin.
I'm here.
And I see Alder Johnson has just joined us. Alder Johnson.
Here.
Thank you. And Alder Dorf is here. Approval of the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Alder Johnson, second by Alder Corpus Dax. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Regular business. I'm sorry, approval of the minutes. I'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Alder Johnson, second by Alder Galvin. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right. Regular business. Item 1. I'm going to read item 1, and here's how we're going to handle this. I will, after I read the item, I will be yielding the floor to Alder Brunette, and then we'll be requesting a motion to open the floor so that Representative David Steffen will be able to speak to us. And if there are others here to speak, then they will also be able to do that. So, item 1, a request by Alder Brunette to the Finance Committee, which states, for Representative David Steffen to provide a presentation on his proposed legislation regarding Lambeau Field and the Stadium Board, and for him to explain how it affects the City of Green. I propose this be a question and answer session with committee members and other alders in addition to the presentation. And the I is referring to Alder Brunette. That was part of his communication. So at this time, Alder Brunette, would you like to explain a little bit more before we open the floor?
Sure. I appreciate that, Chair Dorf. I am have spotty Wi-Fi, so if I kind of excuse myself during the meeting, I'll be listening, but I won't probably be asking many questions. It's quite simple. Representative Steffens has brought forward an idea that greatly impacts the City of Green Bay, and it's legislation that will be going through state government. And I thought it would be very appropriate for the representative to present his idea to the City of Green Bay before it continue on, because if it's something that is not in the best interest of Green Bay, I think it's incumbent upon all of us in our official duties as alders and city government to voice our opinion. I'm not in favor or I'm not against the plan as it stands. So me including this on an agenda item by no means implies support of the idea, but I do look forward to hearing what the representatives share with the City of Green Bay, and then the committee can discuss it. And I do encourage opening the floor because I do believe there are other members of the public who would like to comment on the presentation. So with that, I have really no other comments to add other than to welcome the representative to the Finance Committee and thank him for his presentation.
I also want to interject that this is not an action item tonight. We won't be taking a vote on moving forward or not. I think probably at the end of the presentation to receive and place on file, because it is not posted as an action item. So it's informational only. Okay.
Yep, correct.
So committee, any comments before I ask for a motion to open the floor? All right.
Let's open the floor to hear from interested parties.
Motion by Alder Johnson.
Second.
Second by Alder Corpus Dax. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of opening the floor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. The first speaker we'll hear from is Representative David Steffens to give his presentation. And then afterward, if anyone wants to speak, what I'd like you to do, if you can, is to show me on video. You can raise your hand on video. If you don't have that video capacity and you like to speak, you can speak out and ask me if you may speak. So go ahead, Representative Steffen. Welcome. And you're muted. And you're still muted.
Let's try now. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Now you're
okay. Excellent. Well, first of all, I want to thank, Alder Burnett and the rest of the Common Council members of public for participating tonight. This effort is very much about explaining, educating, sharing, and learning for all parties. And so I'm thankful for this opportunity, and especially with an issue that is as complex and impactful as this one. And so I would like to start first with, and by the way, my presentation, if you will be more conversational versus something formal. I want it to be something that is well received, easy to receive, and I am incredibly interested in any follow-up questions that relate to this.
Let me interrupt for 1 minute. I think that I must ask you for your name and address.
Sure.
Is that correct?
No problem. David Steffen, 715 Olive Tree Court, Village of Howard.
Thank you.
Sure. So as it relates to this legislation, there are three major reasons why I was interested in working on this and have put this together. The first relates to the fact that the stadium district is in fact a statutory artifact. And what I mean by that is the three primary goals that were established in state law through a piece of legislation that was enacted in May of 2000 had three specific purposes. One was to oversee the construction that was created through the referendum of the $300 million redevelopment of Lambeau Field. Two, to oversee the tax, the ways to pay for that redevelopment. And third, ensure the bonds that related to the project were fully paid. Those were the three primary objectives of the Stadium District Board. All three of those have been satisfied since 2015. And like Milton Friedman once stated, is there is nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. I feel like there is much of that that's involved with this. As it relates to the history of this and legislative intent and actual statutory writing that indicates its artifact nature, its short-term duration, is back in '99 and especially in 2000, is 1 week after this bill became law, I was employed by the Green Bay Packers to run the redevelopment project from a community perspective. And I was involved with the discussions with the lead author of the legislation, the executive committee members of the Green Bay Packers, the brass at 1265, and was very much aware that this was never intended to be a forever government entity. It was designed for a specific purpose. That purpose has been satisfied, and for that reason, it is appropriate to consider its closure. So that's kind of one of the first points. The second point, and I indicated it with in part through a press release that was submitted yesterday and touched on at the very end of an article written by Rich Ryman with the Press Gazette, is concerns relating to transparency and oversight of the finances at the Stadium District. I believe that the city and political subdivisions in general are better constructed and structured for the oversight of the large sums of money that are involved here. Having directly elected officials be the ones who are directly overseeing dollars and cents, invoices, bills, work orders. That is where government does its best work in terms of providing transparency, community involvement, in oversight. These have been dramatically lacking at the stadium district level. In fact, the stadium district was cited in its last 5 audits for not providing proper oversight and transparency relating to the financials. I provided that in my copies of press release, which if they haven't been provided to you, I will provide that to you. Furthermore, as a stadium district, contrary to what maybe the public and maybe the city even thinks, they don't actually look at any financial documents relating to the expenditures being made for the maintenance and operations of Lambeau Field. Not a single one. They don't look at a work order. They don't look at any dated expenses or invoices. They don't review and do any type of bidding, of course, as relates to any of the contractors doing work. They don't evaluate for appropriateness of the work as it relates to the function. It is essentially and entirely handled by the help, by Patrick Webb, the executive director, who 1 to 3 times a year cuts a check in reimbursement to the Green Bay Packers, and that's it. And with the volume and dollars associated with this program, I find that to be substandard, and I firmly believe that the city of Green Bay could do a far better job in providing that base level of oversight and transparency. And with any entity that does business with the government, whether it's local, state, or federal, the one thing that you must be willing to accept in exchange for that public assistance is a tremendous amount of oversight and transparency, because the money is not ours, it's the public's. And from that perspective, I believe there is a tremendous upgrade that would occur by transitioning from a 7-member board that meets a few afternoons a year and transitioning it directly to the elected officials of the city of Green Bay. The third item, and this is something that's going to have to be dealt with regardless of this legislation, and I'll kind of put this very simply: who should oversee and receive the $180 million that will be coming through that entity beyond expenses? $180 million above expenses will be running through the stadium district as it is right now, that are beyond the expenses of the maintenance and operation agreement articulated in the lease between the stadium district and the Green Bay Packers. All told, it is roughly $280 million that between now and the end of the lease, 2043, will be running through that entity. So if there is one thing that I'm hopeful that above all will be looked at as a community imperative, a city of Green Bay imperative, a county imperative, is who should receive and oversee the $180 million surplus. That will exist regardless of what happens with this legislation this year or in future years. So those are the 3 primary issues with which I have been developing this legislation. Again, the historical artifact nature of this temporary government bureaucracy. 2, concerns regarding transparency and oversight by a non-accountable to the voter government entity. And 3, what are we going to do with that $180 million of the cost of maintaining and operating Lambeau Field per the lease? So those are the 3 major things that relate to that. So what I had developed over the last almost 8 months as a part of this effort is to research the lease itself, understand the statutes that relate to this type of entity and the handling of its finances, and produce a realistic option for how to address this matter. Now, for those who have been tracking this, I started in the first week of November by introducing a rough draft. And I was very clear that, hey, this is a rough draft. I find it very difficult myself personally that unless I have something down on paper to share with others, It can express and explain very complicated programs, situations. And so that's what I did. I provided a rough draft for the community's review, and that was the initial draft. Since then, I have retooled that draft, and that is the one that you received within the last couple weeks that I sent to each one of you. That provides a tightened version of the legislation that is now available by the state legislature. So to go through the financials, which is kind of the meat of the potato that relates to this, is again, $280 million is how much will be, and that's an estimate, and I think it's actually a conservative one. They'll be running through the existing stadium district until the end of the current lease of 2043. And so my proposal was to have the lion's share of that money go to the city of Green Bay for specific purposes relating to either law enforcement, economic development, or road repairs. So the majority of the money would be going to the city of Green Bay. The city of Green Bay would also be the recipient and responsible party for all the rights, responsibility, and obligations currently existing with the stadium district. So what are those? The stadium district really doesn't have any responsibilities beyond that existing within the lease itself. And so the lease with the Green Bay Packers is primarily predicated on reimbursing them for a specific amount every year through 2031. So as you'll remember, I mentioned that the lease goes through 2043. Obligations end on January 1, 2031. So you have 8 years of financial expectations, but you have 20 years of revenue generation. So some of the people who have reviewed this have said, hey, how could it be possible to be providing some money back to the public, giving money to the city of Green Bay, providing smaller amounts for infrastructure needs to the county and the village of Ashwaubenon? How could you possibly do that and maintain the commitment to Lambeau Field? Well, it's because the expenses are capped at a certain number of years, but the revenue lasts for 20. And so that is how we run into this situation where we have revenues that'll far, far, far exceed expenses. And we get back to one of the primary issues that I believe needs to be addressed is what do we do with the $180 million surplus? And so those are the issues that have been addressed. Now, some of those in the revised version have been based on input from the public. And so the public has communicated to me through a survey as well as emails, Facebook communications, calls to my office is a few things. One is that they really didn't feel comfortable, and Alder Burnett had kind of referenced this in some of his comments several weeks ago, is sadly a lot of people don't trust the city of Green Bay of doing this right, that somehow they're going to screw up this whole deal. And so one of the things I did in my revised version is to put the same controls and assistance that exists for the stadium district in place for the city of Green Bay. So what do I mean by that? The two primary assistive elements relating to the maintenance and operations of Lambeau Field are one, the audit process, the annual audit process, which I require by law to be included with the city of Green Bay, and two, the required contracting of an independent large facility management company to provide the direction on this is what needs to be repaired, this needs to be done annually, this is an issue that needs to be addressed here. That is also required by law that the city of Green Bay either maintain the existing contract with a company called Sigma or hire a similar company to provide that service. And in that way, the elements that relate to control and oversight of the expenses portion or maintenance portion of Lambeau Field are retained. The audit, Sigma, or similar large facility management expert company, and three, the lease itself. So the boundaries are very clear in terms of the time frame, 8 years. The assistive expertise that the City of Green Bay currently doesn't have with any of its other capital projects, the large facility management and maintenance company like Sigma, and the audit procedure would all exist. So those were things that have changed since the draft. I also incorporated an element that was based on input from the Packers. They were concerned about having the license plate revenue not going to Lambeau Field. So I addressed that as well. Now, to be clear, when we start talking about the revenue and this $180 million of surplus, $280 million in total, be aware that 90% of that revenue is coming from one place, and that's the ticket tax that is applied to every admission ticket involving Lambeau Field. So that generates roughly $7.8 million. This most recent, not the 2020 year, because it was a pandemic year, but in 2019, that generated about $7.8 million in revenue for the stadium district. But going forward, the trajectory on that will be significantly higher. Now, I made projections, and that is certainly clear as to how much revenue that will generate into the future. And over the next 20 years, I projected a 45% total increase on those revenues to make that possible. Now, how did I come with that 45%? Well, I did a complete size down from what the last 20 years of ticket prices have been at Lambeau Field. Over the last 20 years at Lambeau Field, the ticket cost and therefore the associated ticket tax increased by over 120%. I only applied a 45% cost increase through that effort. So those were some of the major changes that were involved. And the last piece that I'll mention that has received some attention relates to giving money back to the taxpayers. Now, I know some people love the idea, a lot of the constituents love the idea, but some people may say, well, why do that at all? And that's because when there is a tremendous overage that exists relating to a taxing process, I believe that we should be thinking of the taxpayers. Now, I'm going to bring you back to 2015, when the same or similar issue existed with excess 0.5% sales tax money. I made the decision as the author of that legislation as well to have that go back to the political subdivisions, including the City of Green Bay, which received over $5 million. Now, you can all say that the taxpayers benefited from that money, but they didn't actually get it in their pocket. And so as we are taking a second big bite at the apple of excess surplus money related to this relationship, I felt that having a smaller portion go directly back to the people was worthy of discussion. And so that's why I included it. So again, I provided the three primary reasons why I feel like it's important that we address this issue. The revenues are exceptionally high over the next 20 years, 280 million. The expenses are relatively capped because they conclude in 2031 when the expenses relating to maintenance and operations transition to the Green Bay Packers. And so we have this situation where we have $180 million of delta, $180 million of surplus that someone's going to eventually have to address. And the question is it appropriate for the 7 appointed members of the stadium district to be handling that kind of money in that type of environment? So those are kind of this I want to provide relating to the legislation. For you committee members, I provided you a 4-page frequently asked question document, a 3-page summary of the bill and financials, as well as the legislation as a whole. So at this point, I would welcome specific or broad questions. I am here to answer any and every question and will be here as long as you would like to have me. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Stebbins. Alders, I'm wondering if we would like to hear from Aaron Popke and then ask our questions. How do you feel about that? Would we like to hear kind of counterpoint first and then come up with questions? Alder Galvin?
I think we should hear from I don't know, Pat Webb was talking about possibly joining in on this. He's got some intimate knowledge on the financial workings and the oversight that's being alleged that hasn't been conducted properly, things like that. I'm not sure if he'll be able to make it or not, but certainly I think we should hear from the Packers first.
Thank you. Alder Johnson?
As long as the floor is open, let's keep it open, and anybody who wants to speak, I would let them speak.
Okay. And Alder Corpus Dax? Okay. All right.
It was kind of like a shrug. It was like, sure.
I took it as an affirmative. I know her well. That's what she said. Yes. All right. So, Mr. Popke, you have asked prior to the meeting if you could speak. Could you please unmute yourself? And
sure. Good afternoon.
There you are. Hello. Please introduce yourself and give us your address.
Well, good afternoon. Aaron Popke with the Green Bay Packers at 1265 Lombardi Avenue. I'll apologize in advance. I'm fighting a cold, so apologize for the voice. I won't be doing any voiceovers professionally after this, no. I think what would be helpful is to catch everyone up on the history of this in a way that accurately represents the intent, how it's gone through, and what the future could look like. You know, after this proposal was out there, we received a lot of questions just asking for clarification and items of that nature. So I think if you bear with me, I'll read through a narrative that goes back to where we got this started and where we are today and the concerns we have with the proposal. So that being said, just more than 21 years ago, Brown County citizens decided to support the redevelopment Lambeau Field, an effort that was crucial to the long-term success of the Packers, and it has worked well beyond expectations. A coalition of leaders, which included the Packers, Team Lambeau, elected officials, and other community leaders and fans, explained to voters the details and importance of the project. In addition to the redevelopment of the stadium, leaders said it would be incomplete and short-sighted for the plan to not include the funding to support the long-term upkeep of the stadium. This coalition shared that point consistently when they were in the community speaking with voters. Additionally, our Q&A materials, which Representative Stephan himself references in his FAQ, clearly states the taxpayers would be paying for part of the maintenance, along with funds from the sale of license plates, Packers license plates, that is, engraved bricks, and an income tax checkoff. Voters chose to support that plan September 12, 2000 by binding referendum, where the question on the ballot was specific that the tax proceeds would be used for Lambeau Field. The trust fund is administered under the 2001 Lambeau Field lease that was approved by the Green Bay Common Council and committed the trust fund exclusively to Lambeau Field operations and maintenance costs for the duration of the lease. By 2015, the trust fund had accumulated enough to make all the trust fund's required operation and maintenance payments through 2031. Sales tax was then retired. The 2000 legislation also authorized a ticket tax, provided that the proceeds were used for Lambeau Field purposes. I want to make that clear. The Lambeau Field lease imposed a 10% ticket tax and contractually committed the proceeds to Lambeau Field operation and maintenance costs for the current and any extended term of the lease. Regarding the ticket tax in this proposal, under the Lambeau Field lease, the Stadium District's ticket tax proceeds are dedicated to Lambeau Field purposes, specifically to operation and maintenance costs throughout the current and any extended term of the lease. The new ticket tax contemplated by the legislation has already been contractually disclaimed by the city under the lease, and if nevertheless is imposed, would result in contractual liability on the part of the city, indemnification liability on part of the city. The proposed legislation does not and cannot change those or any other terms of the lease. Lease provisions can only be changed by agreement of all parties to the lease. Furthermore, the proposed legislation would completely undo the funding for Lambeau Field operation and maintenance costs Over 50 million of the sales tax trust funds dedicated by the legislature, the Brown County voters, and the Green Bay Common Council to Lambeau Field purposes would instead be diverted and doled out in 2022 to select Brown County residents and a variety of other purposes unrelated to Lambeau Field. Tickets tax proceeds and the miscellaneous sales proceeds contractually committed to Lambeau Field will be allowed to be diverted to purposes unrelated to Lambeau Field. Those diversions would create a very substantial dollar-for-dollar deficit in the funding for Lambeau Field. The deficit would have to be made up in some combination from the city's general fund, for example, property taxes, or by the Packers. We know this, the stadium district continues to work well. The board, as we know, was a single-purpose, non-political entity that represents every Brown County community that invested in the stadium, oversees the operations and maintenance of Lambeau Field according to the lease and statutes. This structure of apolitical oversight and the confidence in it enabled the Packers to invest $500 million more in the stadium in the past decade. Furthermore, the Packers and private parties expanded on that success to invest in the adjacent Titletown, a development that will exceed $300 million of investment when complete. Lambeau Field and Titletown are success stories. The Packers, the city, and the stadium district have worked together harmoniously and successfully for over 20 years under the current setup. Representative Stephan's legislation would position them instead as adversaries, as they would be forced to sort out who would be responsible to make up the operations and maintenance funding deficit. The proposed legislation is unwise public policy for that reason alone. But it is more than that. It would constitute a breach of trust and an illegal evisceration of the Lambeau Field lease. It would leave no choice other than immediate major litigation to prevent it from taking effect. To the extent that the Packers are already forced to spend time and resources opposing the illegal proposed legislation, we are considering using the indemnification provisions of the lease and other rights to recover legal fees from those responsible, including the state and the city, to the extent of their affirmative participation. The signatories to the lease, the Packers, the city, and the stadium district, have begun work a few years ago to extend the lease, which is currently set to expire on December 31st, 2032. These parties will continue that plan, one which honors the commitment of the community, as it is the best method for continuing the long-term success of Lambeau Field and furthering the significant economic development that has accompanied it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Papke. So is there anyone else from the public that is here to speak? Just please speak up if you are here to speak. Anyone else here to speak on this issue? I'll ask one more time. Is there anyone else here to speak on this issue? So at this point, I don't want to close the floor, but I want to open it to questions if any of the alders have questions that they'd like to ask.
Motion to close the floor.
Oh, wait, Alder Johnson has his hand up. Okay. Alder Johnson, are you talking? Because we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. If the point is to be Q&A, we've got to leave the floor open, right?
Amen.
Well, right. If there are questions, I mean, I didn't see anyone raise their hand. I think that's what Alder Galvin was responding to. Is that right, Alder Galvin, that you didn't see any questions?
Right.
Yeah, I've got questions. So I've got lots of them.
Okay.
And again, I'm sure you guys are surprised.
I am shocked, truly. All right, Alder Johnson, go ahead.
Yeah, Representative Stephan, thanks for being here. Also, thanks to Aaron Papke as well for presenting the Packers side of this. Most of my questions are directed at you, Representative Stephan, obviously as the author of the legislation, because I think that's where the most clarity is probably desired on my part. Did you have the Legislative Fiscal Bureau review the legislation, and did they have a report on it?
Senator Coles did, and I am having the Legislative Reference Bureau and Legislative Council provide a memo that addresses many of the issues that Mr. Popke addressed. So just so people are aware, Legislative Council and Legislative Reference Bureau are the legislature's attorneys. They are the experts on statutory law. They are the ones who are experts on constitutional law and all the direction and support relating to the legal rights authority that exists within the state of Wisconsin. The Legislative Fiscal Bureau is our accountants, our actuaries. They are not attorneys. And so that would not be the place that I'm looking for, because I'm not asking to have numbers counted. To address the issues that Mr. Popke has addressed, I had those addressed on the front end with the attorneys who represent the state.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Certainly I think from a state perspective, there's kind of the discussion that will occur, obviously, with our state legislature. From a city perspective, the numbers, I think, are the piece that, that I look at probably a little bit more closely, because whatever action you take, ultimately, it's the number piece, right, that'll impact us. Yes. And I've heard it brought up, and I can't even remember where I've heard this, but that the city may need to, hypothetically this happens, the city may need to bond for some of those maintenance funds up front until the ticket tax can catch up. One of the things that I haven't seen in any of the proposals is what expenses look like by year. Could you just maybe explain that to me, where that statement comes from, or where that assumption comes from, and if in fact it's legit?
So you are accurate that there are expenses. It is a relatively formula-driven process for the reimbursement of the expenses relating to Lambeau Field. So just so you're clear as the way this process works, the Stadium District Executive Director receives some sort of communication that generates 1 to 3 checks a year back to Lambeau Field. There isn't any actual oversight of maintenance or operations or that sort of thing. That is the extent of it. So there's kind of a programmed amount of money that goes, and it increases every year. And to your point, because there is going to be a period of time that on the front end, not year 1, not year 2, but years 3 through 8, where there would be the money that is generated from the ticket tax and other revenue would not equal the expenses for the city of Green Bay. So there would be a need to, how do we address that shortfall? And that could occur through several methods. One, you're right, bonding for those 5 years of additional expenses, that is a possibility. A second is, with the city being in control of the ticket tax, it can modify the amount that it generates through the ticket tax. And third, it could also trigger an opportunity for a renegotiation of the lease with the Green Bay Packers. So there are multiple options on ways to address that shortfall, and those are the 3 that immediately come to mind. And so those are all options that are available.
Okay, and I appreciate that explanation. One thing that I think about, and I've heard stated that obviously, the legislation is what created the Stadium District Board. Legislation can undo it. And I appreciate your explanation as well that the Legislative Reference Bureau is the one that's currently evaluating whether or not they can the legislation can undo the nature of that contract that currently exists. If we have, legislation that in fact can undo such an agreement, what assurances would the city have that future legislation couldn't put us into a predicament if we agree to this, right? And all of a sudden we find ourselves bonding for that 5 years of maintenance without an ability to ticket tax after that because future legislation does something there. I just want to make sure that the city's not ended up, holding a bag on maintenance costs for which we have no ability to to generate revenue to pay.
Right. Okay. So first, I want to clarify the way that it's being portrayed. The contract is still being honored. The lease, and what Mr. Popke did not express to you and is vexing to me to this day, they're not impacted by a single penny through this single letter of the lease, which at the end of the day, it's a financial agreement. Every single penny that they are due, they shall receive. That doesn't change. What the legislation does is reassign existing obligations and responsibilities from one government entity to another. No contract, no party can bind the state on its authority to reassign its own obligations. It is impossible, legally or constitutionally, for the stadium district to all of a sudden say, we want to exist for 1,000 years. So we will enter into a contract with the Green Bay Packers for 1,000 years and thereby guarantee and prevent the state from ever having influence over us. That's essentially what the argument is that Mr. Popke is making on behalf of the Green Bay Packers. It is false. It is not bound by law. And I'll have the written version of that analysis available for all of you going forward. And the other thing I want to mention to you, and I don't know if you caught this, but I found it, I'm interested to find how you all respond to the fact that the Green Bay Packers just said if you are affirmative and agree to this, they may sue you. I mean, I tell you what, that's quite something. So again, and as it relates to the history, Aaron Popke nor anyone at 1265 was involved in the discussions at the time that they were happening. Individuals are no longer at there, and some of them have passed away. So it's fascinating that those comments and threats are being posed to the city of Green Bay as it relates to an issue that has no financial impact. Every element of the lease are still held responsible for the city of Green Bay and all the opportunities as well. This is about closing down a stadium district board, a board that has developed right in the legislation. In fact, you won't be able to find that anywhere else in state law where it actually creates a mechanism for closure on its own. And so the amounts of money we're talking about far exceed what anyone had ever expected over the long period of time. And with the three primary objectives being satisfied, the public and the city of Green Bay should be concerned about vesting that much power and authority in a 7-member appointed group of individuals with limited and suspect transparency and oversight.
Okay. And just one more question for Representative Stephan, and then I do have just a couple for Mr. Popke. Recognizing that there would be this potential for maintenance shortfall that the city would have to account for. In your legislation, again, hypothetically, this passes the state, would you consider a provision that rather than some of the other buckets that you've identified for givebacks, would you consider holding back an amount that is sufficient to be transferred to the city for the maintenance fund so that we would not have to contemplate bonding or general fund levying ticket tax increases, any of that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
If that is the barrier for support, let's do it. I don't have an issue with that at all. Again, this continues to be a work in progress, and and Mr. Popke can certainly even express this. Since this has been released in November, I've asked Green Bay Packers probably half a dozen times, please show me where the financial impact is on the Green Bay Packers with my legislation. What's the beef? Where's the big problem? If you are still having every responsibility transferred to one government entity to another, and you're still getting every penny of public money that you are guaranteed under the lease, tell me why you're putting up such an opposition. And I haven't been able to get any answer to that as to show me where you are financially being harmed a single penny.
Okay. Chair, just a couple questions for Mr. Popke, then, if I may.
Certainly.
Mr. Popke, obviously, if there's one thing I've learned, the NFL has a lot of rules and regulations as well. From your perspective, is there anything from an NFL perspective that comes into play here, that, especially when we're talking about ticket taxes and fees, surcharges, things of that nature, anything from the NFL that would prohibit us from doing that?
Well, thank you, Alder Johnson. I would say this, the NFL, I mentioned that $500 million of further investment that the team has put in. That includes NFL money. And the NFL would not approve that money to go into the stadium if it was not for the structure that's in place now. That includes the district, and it includes the trust fund for maintenance and operations. So if that were to go away, and I've explained the reasons why it's wrong on many fronts, that could jeopardize our ability to get additional funds for investment into the stadium from the league level. Absolutely, to answer your question there.
Okay, thank you for that. In Representative Steffen's proposal, he made an assumption, at least that's what I gathered here, that we would see over the term of the lease a 45% increase in ticket cost, relative to the historical average of 120%. I think it's safe to say that in the last 10 to 20 years, the business of the NFL has dramatically changed. So, do you think ticket prices are plateauing, or do you think that 45% would be a reasonable expectation over the term of that lease?
I couldn't speak to the projections. We've stated pretty consistently that we try and keep our prices in the mid-range of the average price around the NFL. We feel that accurately reflects the experience that you have at Lambeau Field, but also takes in mind the market that we're in. We've got a top level experience, and we price our tickets more in the mid-range there. So as we move into the future, the increases would be accordingly part of the ticket revenue, but also the ticket tax revenue, in which I stated in my remarks, that is all contractually obligated toward Lambeau Field. You cannot take that tax and divert it to anything other than Lambeau Field. That was the purpose of the lease. That's the purpose of the ticket tax, which we discussed the NFL previously in your last question. That would not be allowed either under NFL guidelines and rules. A ticket tax is intended to go toward the stadium maintenance and upkeep. And that's what we spoke of way back in 2000 as this was being set up, that the trust fund from sales tax money would go toward the stadium. And then the other piece, the ticket tax, is contractually obligated to the stadium. And that is one of our concerns with the financial pieces that Representative Steffen mentioned. That money is obligated to the stadium. That's the intent of the ticket tax, to keep Lambeau Field up and in the experience that it is. So that has to go to the stadium. It can't be diverted anywhere else. It's a league guideline, but also, as I mentioned earlier, in the lease, it is very clear in the current lease and any extension of that lease, ticket tax money has to go to Lambeau Field, contractually obligated.
Okay. Can I piggyback on the answer? I'm sorry. Alder Johnson, could I just piggyback on to get a little more clarification?
Yeah, of course.
So, Mr. Popke, when I was listening to Representative Steffens, that there's $180 million beyond expenses, I don't understand how there can be a surplus when there's so much money, it costs so much to upkeep the stadium and cover the maintenance. Can you explain how is there that much of a surplus? And if there is, how can there be?
No, there's no surplus. As I said, in the lease, all ticket tax money is obligated to maintenance and operations of the stadium. There is a formula that's put in place that uses the sales tax money that was put into the trust fund. And the ticket tax money is separate from that. The first 500,000 goes into a separate fund. Elder Galvin is familiar with these things. And then the rest of the ticket tax gets directed back to Lambeau Field for maintenance and upkeep. And as that goes up, then that same method of direction back to the team to keep up the stadium continues to exist. And again, that's the current lease, but any extension of that lease too, that is built into that. It's contractually obligated. And I mentioned the indemnification. If there, for some reason that this were to go forward and a different tax is imposed, the city is indemnified to pay the Packers what it's due from the lease. So there's no extra revenue there.
Okay, so just further, for maybe both Representative Stebbins and Aaron, how can one of you say there's $180 million beyond and there's a surplus, and one says there's not a surplus? Both of you have somewhat believable stories. So go ahead, Representative Stephens.
So, and I think one of the ways that could be helpful with, and I know that Aaron's not an attorney, so I'm thinking that he has spoken to one that has provided that input. I certainly have had attorneys review the lease. And the reason where the difference is under my team's analysis, the obligations to the stadium district, or under my proposal, the city of Green Bay, almost entirely end in 2031. But the revenue continues until 2043. So you have 8 years of expenses, but 20 years of revenue. So that's why it stops, because in 2031, under the lease, that Mr. Popke is claiming are forever the responsibility that financially the public has to pay the Green Bay Packers, forever, that it is the legal interpretation of the state that ends in 2031.
Well, then who's going to pay that money? Where's the money going to come from?
The Packers assume responsibility as of 2031 for maintaining the facility.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Yes.
Alder Johnson, do you have any more questions?
No, actually, my last question was for Mr. Popke, and it related to what we're talking about. There's been an estimate placed in here on maintenance obligations, 115 to 118 million. I just wanted to ask Mr. Popke if he felt that number was reflective of what actual maintenance costs are.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. There's in Mr. Steffens' proposal, Representative Steffens' proposal, there's maintenance obligations estimated at 115 to 118 million during the duration of the lease, which I presume is through 2031, the maintenance obligation. Do you feel, from the Packers' perspective, that number accurately reflects what maintenance would cost during that period?
I think it's hard to estimate that precisely, and it is an estimation. However, what we have to remember is that there's two components here. There's the formula that's set up from the sales tax revenue that was put in the trust fund that goes into the stadium, and then the ticket tax revenue that is separate. I mean, the way that was set up, that the ticket tax is imposed upon, it's a tax that's paid by people going to the games. It's not a public tax. It's separate from that sales tax that was set aside, and that very clearly was intended to go toward the stadium, not to be diverted. I made mention in my earlier remarks that was always part of the narrative that we were discussing, and I was familiar with how that was being developed as well. And people discussing in the community always said that money is going to be set aside from the sales tax to go in the long-term upkeep of the stadium. And that is combined with a formula to handle those costs. But separate from that, the Packers pay anything above that currently. And when that trust fund sales tax money is paid out at the end of the current lease, there is the ticket tax money that continues to flow back to the stadium for maintenance and operations. And then the Packers pay the costs above that, whatever they are. I mean, they're going to be substantial. It's a facility that we know is very old. I think the audits that have been in place show how well the team keeps it up. We're very proud of it and what it is and what it represents. And moving forward, we're prepared to invest. As I said, we're through our current projects is $500 million. And moving into the future, you know, that is going to continue to increase. So where we are concerned is that this ticket tax revenue, which was intended to go toward the stadium, the notion that it can be diverted elsewhere and that there's an excess, that's just not the case. And the lease clearly states that. And yes, the current lease ends then, but if there was an extension put in place, lease extension, the ticket tax would be obligated to the stadium. It can't be diverted. So again, there's no excess, and that's where there is financial harm to the Packers.
Okay, thank you for that explanation, because obviously from our perspective, we don't understand those details, right? Because I haven't at least seen, you know, what kind of checks are written for maintenance of the facility. And that's just something that for everybody's, you know, benefit here, if this dialogue continues, I think the city of Green Bay would certainly need to have a much stronger understanding of, you know, what types of expenses we would potentially be inheriting, and you know, what risk exposure exists in terms of that revenue stream to appropriately cover those expenses. So I appreciate it. Definitely, as Alder Dorf said, multiple perspectives on this. So that's all I've got, Alder Dorf. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you,
Alder Johnson,
go ahead.
Alder Dorf, if I may, I just, as part of that long term, I'll just remind everyone what I said at the start, that we had already begun discussions with certainly the district and the staff there and the board, but also with the city, with the intention of beginning to see what the end of the lease looks like, signing an extension that updates what needs to be updated and those types of things. So that's something we're committed to. We already started down that path, and we intend to continue to do so.
So Chairman Dorf, before we close out for sure, I would just like to have an opportunity to speak once we get to that point, if there aren't, you know, I'm going to be available for all additional questions, but I did want to just make comments before you close down the evening.
Absolutely. And I have indications that there are others that would like to ask questions, but first I'll go to the Alder Committee. Alder Galvin.
Thank you. I've just got a bunch of kind of notes that I've been jotting down here, so I'm going to go back and forth between the Representative Steffens and Mr. Popke. Representative Steffens, you believe that 10% ticket tax, roughly $7.8 million a year, you believe at the end of 8 years from now, that becomes the city's money?
Under the legislation, after the obligation that's under the lease at 2031, you would have opportunities related to that. So it's expressed within the legislation. So the legislation would turn the pipe from the stadium district to the city of Green Bay. But in addition to turning the pipe would also be all the responsibilities and obligations that the stadium district currently has.
Okay.
So it's a shifting of all the resources and all the responsibilities to the city.
Okay, but that's not a guarantee, correct?
It would be guaranteed because it would be in state law.
Okay, so you're guaranteeing that the state has established a law that says that 10% sales tax has to go to the city of Green Bay?
Yes.
Okay.
No, is that the proposal or is that what's in law?
That's not what's in law.
Okay, that's
you
the
would
proposal.
have control
okay.
over the ticket tax.
Okay. And Mr. Popke, your feeling on that?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's fine. Your interpretation of the 8 years, the ticket tax?
Not so Sorry, yeah, stated before, it's very clear in the lease that any extension of the lease, the ticket tax has to go to the team. Again, I know the proposed legislation establishes a new tax. You know, that could be, we feel that is incorrect on its own. But again, the indemnification that's in the lease, if it were to be extended, the city has to pay that to the team. There is no new revenue source or excess revenue source that can be put in place. The contract between the parties states that very clearly.
All right.
Ticket tax money has to go to the team.
All right, thank you.
For the stadium upkeep.
All right, and Representative Steffens, you said this should have been done in 2015. Why is it taking 6 years to get this ball rolling? I mean, was there oversight on the legislature's part not to be shutting this down sooner? Or was there just something going on that prevented this from happening until now?
Well, I did broach the issue with, because of my involvement in establishing this entire process back in 2000. And by the way, Mr. Popke is correct. An amazing success story. Amazing success story with what has been able to be happen within this incredibly small market. But at some point, you know, there's a responsibility for some evolution in the relationship. The public support of a $2 billion entity should probably begin to stop at some point. So, you know, as it relates to that, as I met with the Green Bay Packers in 2015, and at the time that I was doing the 0.5% sales tax close down, which they opposed that as well, by the way. They opposed the money that you got back in 2015. They also indicated their strong opposition to closing the stadium district at that time. And so I held off on that issue. But the issues have started to compound in my view at the stadium district. And I was also getting very concerned with the fact that the stadium district board was possibly going to be, on behalf of the entire county, the city, be the point on renegotiating a lease or extending it. And so there were a lot of things that were all of a sudden happening at once that made this like the appropriate time to start thinking about it. The other thing that is different is the establishment of the trust fund and other funds related to the maintenance and operation of the $300 million redevelopment of Lambeau Field. Since that time, as Mr. Popke indicated, there's been 9 additional expansions to Lambeau Field on top of that, all of which is continuing to be apparently the financial responsibility of the people. And so 9 expansions equaling over $500,000, an additional $250 million planned. And all of this amazing and wonderful result is having a liability and risk that is now being put on the city of Green Bay and the people of Brown County without them really even realizing.
Okay. You made mention that there's been improper oversight.
Yes.
Of the stadium for at least 6 years. Did I understand that correctly?
Correct.
So the Associated Bank, which I believe is the organization that oversees the finances, and Patrick Webb and Sigma have been doing the oversight improperly?
No, the board members have.
We have.
You have not reviewed a single invoice, a single dated work order. You have not reviewed or had any open bidding of any contractors. And I believe with doing of millions of dollars that have run through, in my opinion, is inappropriate.
All right. This is for Mr. Popke. As I understood things with the current lease, is there a addendum in there for the potential for 2 5-year lease extensions at the end of 2031? There
is what it is 5 2-year extensions. So
okay, I'm sorry.
So 10 years. No, that's okay. But yeah, we're talking about 10 years that it could be extended.
Okay.
And as I stated earlier, our intent is to get a new lease extension through conversations with the city.
Okay. If this was, the Stadium District was to be disbanded as Representative Steffens wants, what would the Packers want done with the license plate money?
Well, the license plate revenue, the intellectual property of the Packers was permitted to be used on the license plates, with the money to be directed to Lambeau Field maintenance and operations. So the only reason that was set up was with that in mind. And if there's any chance of that going to something other than Lambeau Field, then the NFL and the Packers would not permit that.
All right. Thank you. That's all I have right now at this time.
I understand Kathy Hinkvis is out there.
Well,
I'm sorry, Alder Starr. Go ahead, Alder Starr.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you, Representative Steffen, Mr. Popke, for coming. Like Alder Galvin, I've been taking a bunch of notes as well. So just a couple things. First off, is there a way, I'm not a member of the committee, I'm on council, but it would be nice to have some kind of narrative from both you, Representative Steffen, and Aaron from the Packers as well, that we as alders can take a look at, just discussing both sides of this issue. I would appreciate that.
At some point in the future, when this perhaps an act, that might happen. Right now, this is just informational.
Right,
so.
And that's fine. That's fine. I'm just throwing it out there.
Okay.
Let's see. Well, that might answer a couple other questions then. And I don't know if this is the appropriate time to talk about it, but, just talking about the fact that, Lambeau Field is actually considered a Green Bay park. It's part of the park system. Yet, it's a private entity that's running that. So over time, I think this Green Bay had hoped to look at revenues from the gates, that at Lambeau Field, as well as looking at the Titletown district, the fact that, a lot of the monies, from the stadium restoration, the monies have gone to Ashwaubenon area. And it might be the wrong time to bring it up, but it would be, these are things that will come forward as far as just understanding, where does the city of Green Bay benefit right now? We have the Green Bay Packers. We understand it's a international name. Everybody knows who the Packers are, but I'm just seeing the bottom line as far as, where does Green Bay benefit, financially with this? Representative Steffen mentioned that there aren't really audits or financial documents out there that we have that we can look at to really understand this. So that's a concern that I have as well. I think for now that might be all I have. That might be all I have for right now. And if you wanted to comment on that, Representative Steffen or Aaron, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Alder Steyer.
Yeah, and I'll just thank you, Alder Steyer, for your opinion. You bring up an incredibly important point. How does this fit into the framework? First of all, let me back up a little bit. I think if you don't believe or want confirmation of our legal positions, one, I will have mine in writing from the state of Wisconsin for you within the coming weeks. However, I would recommend, as part of just even a good process to do, is your own attorney to provide an analysis of the lease. X on the city, how does it reflect with all these things that are provided? my legislation only relates to things that involve the state of Wisconsin and reassigns every responsibility. So the responsibilities, the financial elements, all are contained within the four corners of the lease. And so if I was you, I wouldn't trust what the Packers are saying, and I wouldn't trust what I'm saying. I would have your own attorneys evaluate the lease and evaluate every one of these issues that we're talking about. Because at the end of the day, what is accurate is that you guys have a responsibility to be aware of how this agreement plays. As do Alder Stoyer's comments as to, what about what's in it financially for the city of Green Bay? I mean, that's a very reasonable question. And to answer some of your points as it relates to gate revenue or naming rights, well, the city signed those away a long time ago. You don't get anything for that. You gave those away many, many, many years ago. And well, you don't get property tax. You know that. What you do have is a bunch of liability for a property that you have a minority ownership in now. You have a minority say in a scene, and you have prohibited and limited access to this minority-owned, minority-controlled stadium. So I know you get that. And that isn't to say that it's a fantastic benefit to our community, but as to the city of Green Bay's coffers, okay, as an entity, those are the things I know you get.
Thank you, Representative Steffens. All right, Kathy or Aaron, did you have any comments?
With respect to how this has benefited the city and the community, excuse me, since the redevelopment, the economic impact of the stadium has grown tremendously. There has been $100 million more impact in the community since the redevelopment. So the investment the community made in the stadium has paid back in multiples, and we're talking about simply the game weekend impact. It's also given the Packers a better financial footing to support various initiatives within the city. So if you think of the economic impact alone, and this isn't measured necessarily by municipality, but certainly Green Bay is part of that. We're approaching $2 billion more of impact with the redeveloped stadium through expansion of the seating, bringing more people to town. There's $15 million every game weekend that comes to the city and the community. I mentioned our charitable impact. At the time of the redevelopment, we were somewhere in the $1 to $2 million a year. We're now over $9 million of charity impact that goes out to the community. We support various economic development initiatives within the city and our own economic development around the stadium with Titletown. While it may not be the city of Green Bay, the impact that it brings to the area is tremendous, and we think that is going to be paid forward tremendously. So without breaking it down by municipality, which we aren't able to do, but we're talking $2 billion for the community in terms of what has been increased since the redevelopment.
I just have to say, on behalf of council, that I would like to thank the Packers. They just recently gave us the money so that we could get the body cameras for the police department. I've lived here 31 years now in Green Bay, and I believe that I've seen, just as a naive citizen who put her name on a list, then 23 years later got her season tickets. I've seen that the Packers have been a part of this community, an important part of this community, supporting the economics, supporting just the name of Green Bay. that it is a community-owned team. I own a couple of shares of stock. I'm sure a lot of people out there do. And the Packers have done a lot for charities I've been involved with. I was on the United Way board of directors. I was on board of directors of Marion House. So I see this synergy that occurs between the city of Green Bay and the Green Bay Packers. And now being on city council, I have even more of an awareness of how the Packers and the city work together. This is not a relationship I would be interested in risking. And I did not feel threatened by what Mr. Popke said about litigation, because litigation is what people do. That you can be sued for anything. There can be it, and so I didn't take it as a threat. I took it as, yeah, that's probably what could happen, and I really hate to see that happen. I know that we have another person that wants to ask questions, so I will yield the floor to Kathy Hinkfist.
Thanks, Barb, and thanks, Representative Steffens, for coming to the meeting and explaining all this. The one thing that listening to Alder Galvin and Brian and the rest of people ask questions, the numbers that you're putting out are your numbers. So an estimate that you have personally done, is there people behind these numbers backing? I mean, where do they come from? If the committee is not handing anything out, the Packers aren't handing anything out, where do the assumptions that are being discussed today come from?
Thank you, Ms. Hinkfist. Could you specifically what
Your
number?
240 million, 180. I mean, you presented it to the fact that there's going to be this surplus amount of income, and we have a board that doesn't see anything with financials on it. So we're sitting here discussing, it feels like we got two trains coming at each other, because you're proposing one thing and the Packers and the city of Green Bay and the village of Ashwaubenon already have an agreement regarding ticket tax and other things that, are just basically going to, so your assumptions, where are these something that you put down on paper, or what documents are behind them that the Packers, yourself, and people at the table would agree upon?
Well, the lease provides, and the historical formula relating to the expenses provide the framework for costs between, and by the way, my numbers are kind of set between January 1, 2023 and beyond. That's kind of my starting point. So this year, because the plan for the legislation was not for it to really go into effect until near the end of this year, my calculations were based essentially on 2023 and beyond. The numbers that relate to the expenses, the reimbursement amounts, are relatively set. Because there's a formula that's established for how much reimbursement is eligible for under the lease, and amounts that are above that annual budgeted amount are the responsibility of the Green Bay Packers. So the expenses, under my interpretation and that of the attorneys I had assisting me, 31 is the end of the financial expenses associated with Lambeau Field. So that number of the 115 to 118 million, that's within maybe 10% of adjustment there. As it relates to the revenue, which extends over 20 years, I base that on the previous 20 years of ticket charges at Lambeau Field. So Lambeau Field, it's documented how much they have charged for an average ticket over the last 20 years. And that it's actually even less than 20 years, is over 120%. And so I just applied simple math, simple percentage math increases as it relates to that increase. So that plus the existing revenues that exist, or how is a developed, it really isn't difficult math, to be quite frank. Now, of course, there may be some variance in there, but shoot, if we're talking $180 million in surplus or 200 million or 150, it's still a lot of money.
So, you know, the Packers have done, the voters put this in place back in 2000. And the Packers have been able to really grow the Lambeau district and have brought things at a relatively fast pace. And I think part of that is because they don't have to go through, you know, the government process that everything else is required to go through. And it allows them to move a lot faster. And that, to me, is invaluable to our community. So Dave, again, back to your estimate, these have not been validated by any type of actuary or accounting firm. They're that you put on paper, and we have $1 billion company in the city of Green Bay, and you guys haven't come together to agree on the numbers?
Who's the $1 billion company?
The Packers, NFL.
So the Packers are a $2 billion operation. And as it relates to the, I would strongly disagree that having it go fast is justification for not being transparent or proper. And so I would strongly disagree that, hey, getting that reimbursement check out to the Packers as quick as possible is of higher value than ensuring that the expenses are eligible, ensuring that they have been properly reviewed, and that the board members themselves are doing what they have been expected to do, which is be directly involved in the oversight. The oversight isn't the executive director. The oversight isn't Associated Bank. The oversight is the board. And so that is my response to that. So you are correct. Yeah, it's fast and easier to just have things rubber stamped, get 3 checks a year. I agree with that. That is much faster, but it's not the deal that is you strike when you deal with government oversight of public funds.
Kathy, I just forgot to ask you please to identify yourself. State your name and address for the record, please.
Name and address, Kathy Hinkfus, 525 Antelope Trail.
Thank you. Do you have any further questions?
I just, you know, listening to this today, it sounds like, again, you get 2 buses or 2 trains going together, and there's so much that needs to be worked out that I don't know how you do it in a public domain.
Well, this is the intent of this meeting is not to work anything out. The intent of this meeting is to gather information.
Yeah,
Kathy, I think we've lost you.
Nope, I'm still here.
Oh, you're here. Okay. All right. Then I will ask, is there anyone else who wishes to speak before we close the floor? Anyone else who wishes to speak? You'd have to speak up and tell me because I cannot see everyone who wishes to speak. All right, at this time, I will entertain a motion to close the floor.
Motion to close the floor.
Second.
By Alder Galvin, second by Alden. Further discussion? See none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. The floor is now closed. Alders, what are your wishes?
I think this was intended to be really just a Q&A. I think we had the opportunity to do that. Unless there's further commentary required by any of the other alders, I would simply make a motion to receive and place on file and let the public discussion continue where it needs to exist outside of this forum.
Is there a second to that motion?
Alder Dorf.
Yes, Alder Burnett.
Sorry, I look kind of eerie walking down some basement stairs, but I thank Representative Steffen and Mr. Popke and Ms. Hinkvist for their comments. This will be going forward through the state legislature, I would imagine. I don't think Representative Steffens will be to it, but I thought it was important for the committee and the greater council and the community as a whole to hear about the legislation from him before it goes too much farther. So I fully support the receive and place on file. That was really I thought it was a good discussion. That's all.
Okay. All right. Did you second that, Alder Galvin?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Seconded by Alder Galvin. And is there any further discussion? I just remembered something. I had said that Representative Steffens could speak at the end, and I don't know if he did finish speaking, but if he didn't, then we need to reopen the floor.
Motion to open the floor.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right. Representative Steffens, we'll give you 3 minutes.
That's all I need. Thank you so much. And I want to again the committee members for having this opportunity, for there being some very direct questions, some exchange, some different thoughts, incredibly valuable. And I don't look at this as an endpoint, but really a starting point, because I have no intention of getting this bill to the governor before we are done in 60 days here in Madison. So this will be a continuing discussion. A couple points is I would recommend that there be, please, listen to your own attorneys on evaluating what you are obliged to as it relates to the lease and what is not. Two, my comments relating to the benefit of the Green Bay Packers was directly to Mark Stoyer's question as to what does the city of Green Bay as an entity receive, not what the community, how it benefits. There is no doubt that the Green Bay Packers have been an invaluable and increasing benefit to the community at large, but the fact that they, their impact is not with property taxes, it is with sales tax, but that doesn't benefit the city of Green Bay with sales tax. That's a state benefit. Or on lodging tax, well, that benefits the county and it benefits the lodging community. So Mark Stoyer's question was specific to the city of Green Bay as an entity, and that was my response. And so as the Green Bay Packers continue to grow at an exponential pace and continue to have the success and stability that will definitely ensure they'll be here for the next 100 years, and growing at a pace that, to be quite frank, is very difficult for a small town blue collar community like Green Bay to keep up with in terms of this responsibility that also comes with this great opportunity. I think there's some serious questions to be had. And certainly one of them should include some of the real challenges that relate to having a stadium district with very little and questionable oversight as it relates to very large amounts of money. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Steffens. Any last comments, Mr. Popke?
Thank you, Alder Dorf. Well, I will be sharing our points that were made tonight, so everybody has them. And I think I just want to reiterate, I think it's very clear where we disagree and we find concerns with this proposal, and that we have a lease in place, a contract in place between parties that are working together well. And as I mentioned earlier, we did initiate a process to see what the end of this and the future of this looks like. And our intent is to continue that process and address any questions that come up as part of that process. I think this is the incorrect way to do this. There's many falsehoods within it, as I pointed out, and it's not the proper way to move forward. And we want to move forward in a way that goes back to, continues to honor the commitment of the community that was made, and the best method to move forward to increase our success going into the future, the success of Lambeau Field, and the positive impact that the Packers can continue to make on the community, including Green Bay specifically. There's a lot of benefit there.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you again.
Thank you. I'll now entertain a motion to close the floor by Alder Johnson.
Second.
Second by Alder Galvin. Discussion. Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. The floor is closed. Now we had a motion, and why don't you remake your motion, Alder Johnson, to receive and place
Motion to receive and place on file.
Second.
Second by Alder Galvin. Any further discussion? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll go on to item number 2. Oh, all right. Review the City of Green Bay's 1033 program inventory. Chief Davis is here, and he's just been excitedly listening and waiting for his opportunity to talk to us. So here he is. You're on, Chief Davis, except that you're muted. Now you're not.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you have the spreadsheet that we circulated. This is, as I understand it, the current inventory of 1033 items that the Green Bay Police Department has acquired through that program up to this point. The only thing, just a couple of highlights that I want to point out, and then really I'm just here to answer hopefully any questions that you have about this. The items in yellow highlighting, I am told, are things that we intend to send back because they either aren't working or we don't use them anymore. As you can see, you know, the things that we've acquired in this program go all the way back to 1996. I realize that, you know, there are some other policy discussions that have happened as kind of the way the cities use the 1033 program has evolved over the years. But really, I just wanted to highlight those couple of things about the meaning of this document. And then, like I said, answer any questions that you all have.
So no more night vision goggles, huh? Or you have better ones?
Those are the kind of thing that become obsolete after a while. And you know, I have not gotten quite this far in the few months that I've been here into the SWAT operations to know exactly what they're using for those right now. But 2017 night vision equipment would be pretty old by this point.
Okay. Any questions from the alders? Yes, Alder Galvin.
Thank you. Chief, on page 2, and to help you, there's 2 yellow highlighted items. And, just immediately under that, dated August 2020, is an unmanned vehicle ground, or looks with a value of $53,000. And then if you go down to the 3rd page, the last 2021 is a unmanned vehicle ground for with a value of $474,000. Are we talking like a Bearcat type vehicle here or something else?
I believe that is the bomb robot.
The first one or the second one?
I think both of them are robots for the bomb team, as I understand it. And that's why it's considered an unmanned. And it's the weird nomenclature that military stuff comes with.
Okay.
Those should be bomb robots.
All right. That's the only question I had for you.
Alder Johnson, any questions?
I like that you think I'm going to be the one with them, though.
I just was asking to be polite. Other Corpus Dax? Nope. All right. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to receive and place.
Alder Johnson, second by Alder Galvin. All those in favor or further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Nay. Motion carries. So we are on to report of the Finance Director. Do you have a report for us, Finance Director?
Hi all. I don't really have a report, I just wanted to ask for some feedback on the capital improvement plan. We are moving forward with the 2022-2026 capital improvement plan. As you know, it's always a large document by the time we pull all the information together. We would like to start bringing that back at the next meeting on the January 25th, because as we've heard in the past, there's some critical functions like some road construction, some infrastructure, and some park programs that really need their approval so we can move forward, get the bonding going so that the project's going to actually happen in the same year that we bond. So just want to bring that, we're planning to bring that forward to you at the next meeting. Where I struggle a little with is I don't have all the funding sources in place. And as you all know, there is so many funding sources available right now. You know, could we use ARPA money? Could we use an infrastructure bill? We've already allocated some of these dollars already future bonding. So I'm going to bring it through and we can start looking at expenses and what you know, we will try to decide what is critical, what maybe needs to move forward in the bonding, or some things we want to hold because of we have an ad hoc facilities meeting also going to be coming forward. These are all things that affect some things that are in this document, but I'm still going to bring it forward so we can start. Is it critical? Should we continue to move this one forward? It has to get done in 2022. Are there some things that we maybe want to put on hold and discuss what is our funding source, or do we want to do some more analysis? But there's some items that I start bringing it forward, even though I don't have it all wrapped up in like one nice book like we had last year. So just wanted to get some feedback. And again, it's not buttoned up like I'd like it to be, but I don't also want to stop the process. So is there any feedback? Does that sound acceptable? We start looking at least the expense side, knowing, I guess I'm just looking for some feedback.
It sounds like we should do that. Alder Johnson, Alder Galvin.
Does all of it have to be taken up at the same time, or can we just address the items of urgency?
And that is certainly direction I could reach out to anyone who has something in their capital improvement plan and ask them to put something in urgent that they want to have complete and try to move forward with their bonding now, not necessarily have a dedicated funding source at this point, but needs to be moved forward, yes, so that we can move forward, and yes, so those projects can happen this year. I certainly can reach out. We have probably a couple directors in particular that I'll be working with then, and then try to bring those kind of as an asterisk and bring them to you to the next meeting.
So are you expecting us to actually take action on certain items at that January 25th meeting?
In the past, we have not taken action on the CIP. We usually have taken 2 to 3 meetings, but whether or not we decide to prioritize it, and then at that point we could decide whether or not we want to discuss it in a future meeting. If you wanted us to do more analysis, we can always. I appreciate some feedback. I'm really wasn't which direction to take, but we do feel like we have to move forward without having it all buttoned up. And this
is really just a first pass, and then we could identify funding sources in that second or third pass yet.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, historically
that works for me. Yeah, if we do whatever's urgent first, that's fine.
Okay, sounds like you have your direction.
I do. I appreciate it.
All right, the contingency fund has $104,650 in it in the 2021, and the 2022 contingency has $200,000 in it. And the next Finance Committee will be Tuesday, January 25th, 2022 at 4:30 p.m.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn by Alder Johnson.
Second.
Second by Alder Corpus Dax. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nay. Should we take 5 minutes?
Yes.
All right. We're at 6:10, so 6:15. We'll see you at personnel.
Great.
Thank you.